Chapter 3 Dachau and Buchenwald in May of 1938, the Austrian authorities arrested some 2,000 Viennese Jews on special orders from Berlin. Superscript 1 Some of these asocial elements, as the Nazis called them, were communists, social democrats, anti-Hitler journalists, and other opponents of the regime. But many, like Bruno Bettelheim, had not been active politically and now found themselves swept up for real or manufactured minor infractions such as traffic violations, or charged with participating in the resistance whether they had or not. The most cynical classification was Schutzhaftling Jude, a Jew incarcerated for his own protection. That was Bettelheim's label, squared though from the outset he maintained that he had been singled out for his anti-Nazi deeds, saying, in the words of one fellow prisoner, that he had been seized for his clandestine activities in the social assistance section of the resistance movement against the Austrian fascist government, cubed in the years to come. He would promulgate this fiction, often insisting that he had been arrested not because he was Jewish, but for his radical political beliefs. But in a sworn affidavit to 5, he said that the Austrian police questioned him for 3 days about his political activities and found no basis whatever for illegal action against him. He said that after this interrogation he was released and then, 2 weeks later, arrested again, and this time jailed. On June 2nd, the police loaded Bettelheim and some 600 other prisoners and Jews and took them to the Westbahnhof, where members of the SS Totenkopf were banned, the Death's Head units. Herded them onto a train for Munich. Even before this transport pulled out that afternoon, the grey uniformed conductors with skulls on their caps began terrorizing their captives, barking commands at the dirty Jews, who, even if they obeyed, were slapped, punched, kicked, and in some cases bayoneted. We were beaten constantly from Vienna to Salzburg, recalled Ernst Federn, then a 23-year-old Marxist who had served as a secretary to his father, the psychoanalyst and Freud intimate Paul Federn. Another passenger was Bruno, a 50-year-old journalist who had been editor-in-chief of Die Time, the principal organ of the Austrian Zionists, which had published many anti-Nazi articles, including some about Dachau, based on works of released prisoners. In Men Crucified, his book about his incarceration, he would call the transit a moving hell. Despite the summer weather, the heating system stifled the carriages. The guards, 2 or 3 in each car, forbade the removal of jackets and provided no water. The prisoners sat dripping with perspiration, forced to keep their hands in their laps and to stare into a blinding light as the train rolled through the night. If a prisoner failed to remove his hat in the presence of a guard, the guard knocked it off with a rifle butt. Bettelheim wrote that he received several blows to the head, and was puzzled as to why the SS did not kill him and the others outright. He wondered, too, how they could endure so much without committing suicide, though some prisoners did. By jumping out of the train windows. He said that the guard shot or otherwise killed 20 prisoners during the night, and that few remained physically unscathed after the 12-hour train trip and the 10-mile truck ride from the Munich station to Dachau. He said that he himself arrived at the camp suffering a loss of blood from the blows to his head and a slight bayonet wound. Superscript 1 as a result, he wrote, the Montreal clinic, where Dov preferred treatment. This gave him a chance to recuperate, and also to take stock of his situation. Bettelheim counted himself relatively lucky to have suffered no permanent physical damage. Superscript 1. By the late spring of 1938, the concentration camp at Dachau, a small town northwest of Munich, had been in operation for 5 years. Superscript 1 squared in the beginning. Its inmates were not primarily Jews but socialists, communists, labor leaders, and other outspoken antagonists of the Nazis. The original reason for incarcerating these politicals, aside from taking them out of circulation for re-education, was to spread terror throughout Germany. a message that grew louder and more effective as the Nazis added categories to their enemies list, among them Jesuits, who balked at the regime's manipulation of the church, Jehovah's Witnesses, who resisted the draft, monarchists, Freemasons, homosexuals, gypsies, and, increasingly, Jews. More than a quarter of Germany's Jewish population had fled Hitler's Aryan utopia by 1938. Now the lightning success of the Anschluss had saddled the Nazis with nearly 200,000 more Jews. Superscript 1 cubed the abandoned World War I munitions factory that had been converted into the camp was designed to hold 5,000 prisoners. By the time Bettelheim's trainload pulled in, the population threatened to overflow, and guards were driving inmate labor gangs toward the summer completion of 34 more barracks. These twin rows of wooden or stone blocks, as they were called, sat surrounded by a wall, a water-filled ditch, and an electrified barbed wire fence. 7 watchtowers manned by guards with machine guns looked down on this stockade. The commandant of the camp, the first of its kind, was a former police officer named Theodor Eicke. He was determined to make Dachau the prototype for all future concentration lager, and, indeed, soon became Inspector General of the entire burgeoning Gulag. It was Eicke who whipped the ill-disciplined young SS volunteers into a cadre of fearsome guards, demanding that they feel no pity for the enemies of the Third Reich in their corral. At Dachau, the SS created the models of incarceration, organizational structure, codes and policies, medical experimentation, and officer guard training that served as the basis for the years of punishment that lay ahead for the inferior peoples of Europe. Now under Eich's tutelage, as did Rudolf Haas, who would become a commandant at Auschwitz. Bruno Bettelheim, wrenched from the comfortable life that he had led for 35 years, now found himself prisoner number 15,029, with his thinning brown hair cropped short. Most inmates bore a single color-coded triangle on the breast of their gray-striped fatigues, pink for homosexuals, black for criminals, sex offenders, and other so-called social prisoners, red for German politicals. Bettelheim did not indicate, in writing about his camp experience, what color triangle he wore, but it was probably red. Whatever color his primary triangle, superimposed on it was a yellow one, creating a Star of David and marking him as one more hated Jew. He was quickly segregated and, with some 200 other Jewish prisoners, crammed into a wooden barrack, stone being reserved for Aryans. Each morning the targets of this degradation fell out for roll call onto the Appelplatz, the camp's central square. From there they marched off to labor details, which lasted from sunup to sunset and sometimes longer. They excavated in gravel pits, built roads, and converted marshes to arable land. But with the new barracks almost finished, their toil also included much make work, such as hauling stones from one end of the camp to the other and then bringing them back. Pulling pushing wagons like so many oxen. An inscription above the main gate read albeit matched fry, work will make you free, The guards spewed out a constant stream of verbal abuse. Shit and asshole were so standard that it was rare when a prisoner was addressed. Otherwise, Bettelheim wrote, Superscript 1 they sometimes forced an entire block to stand at attention on the Appelplatz for hours in the hot sun, each man with his hands behind his head. Weaker inmates collapsed and died on this baked parade ground. Anyone who tried to help a fallen comrade risked solitary confinement or worse. Guards imposed punishments capriciously and often for the slightest transgressions. An inmate who failed to make his bed tightly enough or who did not polish his eating utensils or boots to the liking of the SS could find himself strung from a tree. The rope tied to his wrists behind his back, the weight of his body sometimes dislocating his shoulders. The cries from these hangings, which often lasted for hours, pierced the camp days strapped across the wooden horse and whipped it out. Others suffered in the notorious Wirtschaftsbau, the farm building, where guards hung inmates from stakes in the showers and flogged them. Bettelheim did not write that he suffered this kind of punishment, or any other severe physical abuse, once he left the transport from Vienna. Nonetheless, he may have, and certainly he witnessed these barbarities. He wrote that he saw the guards plunge prisoners into the latrines, suffocating them in excrement. Superscript 1 guards shot inmates or hanged them by the neck in front of their fellow prisoners, usually alleging they had tried to escape. Some inmates hanged themselves in the barracks or found other ways to commit suicide, cutting open their wrists or running against the electrified fence. Dachau never became a mass extermination camp like Auschwitz or Treblinka, but of the more than 206,000 prisoners registered by the camp between 1933 and 1945, when it was liberated by the Allies, 31,591 died inside the barbed wire, most of them after the war began, in September 1939. Superscript 1 despite the mistreatment and constant threat of torture and death. Inmates who humbled themselves before the SS and did as they were told stood a good chance of making it. For all Commandant Eich's savage catechism, he SS leaders split into two groups in 1938. One group wished the inmates to be treated fairly. The other favored cruel measures. Superscript 1 moreover, the Austrians who arrived with Bettelheim brought a new atmosphere to the camp. Many were resolved, wrote Bruno, to meet the rude German methods with passive resistance and attack Nazism by their easygoing Viennese ways. 5,000 men united in the determination not to work could not be coerced even by the SS men. There were men strolling through the camp with wheelbarrows only half full, and even returning with them at the walk when they were empty. In the afternoon there was treatment at the infirmary for prisoners working in the camp who were not confined to bed. Hundreds of people turned up who had nothing wrong with them. One stood there, perhaps for an hour or two, then slipped away quietly just before it came to one's turn. Superscript 1 Bettelheim himself wrote, after one had learned how to live in the camps. The chances of survival increased greatly. Squared if prisoners had the energy at the end of the day's hard labor, they could make use of a well-stocked library. The SS also permitted soccer and other sports and arranged concerts, films, theatricals, and lectures, usually drawing on talent among the prisoners. Bettelheim swallowed the food because of physical pain and psychorevoltate admonished him. Listen you, make up your mind, do you want to live or do you want to die? If you don't care, don't eat the stuff. But if you want to live, there's only one way, make up your mind to eat whenever and whatever you can, never mind how disgusting. Squared superscript 1 meals at Dachau. Consisted of bread, cheese, soup, and occasionally sausage and other meats. Bettelheim testified many years later that this fare, though badly prepared, was relatively sufficient and of adequate nutrition, and that he supplemented it with food from the camp canteen, which was quite adequate if you had the money to buy it. Squared the SS allowed each inmate to send 2 letters or 2 postcards a month to relatives. This ration was among the regulations spelled out in 29 lines printed on both the envelopes and stationery that the camp required inmates to use. When Bettelheim's first letter to his mother and sister arrived at Neubaugasse 66, they read, under the boldface heading Konzentrationslager Dachau 3K, that they, too, were limited to 2 letters or postcards per month, that their writing had to be in ink and clearly legible and could not exceed more than 15 lines per page. They were to use normal-size stationery, and envelopes only 1 layer thick. The envelope could contain their letter and a maximum of 5 12-pfennig stamps for Bruno's use. All else was forbidden and would be confiscated. Photographs could not be used as postcards, which were limited to 10 lines. Newspapers were permitted but had to be ordered through the camp post office. Packages were not, because, the regulations assured, inmates could buy everything they needed in the camp. The 5th and final warning in this enumeration was aimed at both sender and recipient. Endless sonst such aus der Schutzhaftung die Lagerleitung since we clause, there is no point in pleading to the head of the camp to be released. Square cube however. The rules specifically stated that prisoners could receive money, gilds and dollars in gestatet, dash. If Paula and Margaret Bettelheim were initially surprised by this permission, they would soon understand that at Dachau Reichsmarks were a matter of life itself. Squared the steady flow of money they began sending. Bruno allowed him not only to buy additional nourishment at the canteen, but to ease his plight with payoffs to camp officials and their capos, inmates on whom the SS bestowed subordinate power. Bettelheim wrote that he was lucky in having relatively stable work assignments. Squared on July 3rd, a month after he entered the camp, he wrote to his mother and sister, "I gratefully received your letter and the money. If that is too much for you, Montreal 1938-39, a Reichsmark was worth 40 cents, which adjusted for inflation was worth $6.75 in 2014. To give a clearer indication of how much money Bettelheim received in the camps, and to better measure other financial transactions, all amounts are given in $2014 hereafter. 2 weeks later he asked them to send $126 immediately and then $95 every 8 days. Squared on July 31st, he wrote again, asking that they send $95 more on August 20th and the same amount every week thereafter. The letters do not indicate how Paula and Margaret were able to grant his request for a supply of Reichsmarks every week or so and still mail only 2 letters per month. Perhaps they sent the money twice a month despite his pleas, or the SS, eager to oil the bribery gears, did not strictly enforce the rule, or the funds arrived separately in money orders. Whatever the case, Bettelheim's 19 letters and postcards to Newbaugasse 66 make it clear that he received much of the money he sought. Since censorship was a given, the letters reveal nothing specific about camp life and little about the prisoner's true condition. But the reality is constantly implicit between the lines of Bettelheim's methodically neat penmanship. "I think of and you all with the greatest longing," he wrote in the July 3rd letter, after assuring Paula and Margaret that he remained physically well. "You have to make all your plans without any consideration of me because my future is completely uncertain. Please don't worry too much. Because it makes no sense, there is no point. All my thoughts are busy only with Gina and you all because I don't want to think about myself. Are you all and Mina healthy? I kiss and embrace you all, unfortunately only in my mind. You and Gina just have to be brave. Many kisses, Bruno." Squared on July 17th, Bettelheim gave his mother power of attorney to declare his assets. Just after the Anschluss, Hermann Göring, Hitler's economic dictator, had announced in Vienna that Aryanization must be quickly implemented throughout the Third Reich. To prevent the Jews from saving their property by fictitious sales and token registration under the names of non-Jewish associates, Göring issued the order against the support of the camouflage of Jewish businesses on April 22nd. 4 days later, in conjunction with the Ministry of the Interior, he published the order requiring the declaration of Jewish property, whereby all Jews, including those married to non-Jews, were enjoined to declare their holdings in Germany and abroad. Squared the system at Germany 42. Water was already hard at work honing his bureaucratic skills. Karl Adolf Eichmann, who, like Hitler, had spent his youth in Linz, was in charge of the Central Office for Jewish Emigration in Vienna. This was a euphemism for an agency that dealt exclusively in blackmail. Permission to leave the country in exchange for all the worldly possessions of Jews and any other undesirables the Nazis sought to banish. By the time the war started, half of the city's 180,000 Jews had managed to purchase their freedom to emigrate by turning over their assets to their persecutors. The new regime moved in on Bettelheim and Schnitzer even before Bruno was arrested. A sheaf of documents charts the Aryanization of the business Bettelheim's father and uncle had founded in 1907. Superscript 1. The Nazis assessed the firm's worth at $177,000, which was likely a significant undervaluation. As a rule, the Nazi bookkeepers forced Jews to sell their businesses for 60 to 75% of their worth, reducing the amount further with taxes and rigid payment terms. In the best of circumstances, the Jewish seller received from 30 to 60% of the value of his property. Cubed squared in many cases the seller received nothing at all. Which may have been the fate of Bettelheim and his partner, Hans Schnitzer, the record is not clear. What is plain is that little was overlooked in setting down the details of this official theft. Listed among the confiscated items were 2 gold watches, 1 signet ring, 1 painting, 2 carpets, table silver, and 1 Stair Baby 50 automobile. The documents also record that in 1937 Bettelheim and Schnitzer's 4 employees included 1 Jew. By June 9, 1938, less than a week after Bettelheim entered Dachau, all 4 employees were Aryans. Their new boss was one Nikolaus Lackner, a bank accountant with whom the partners had done business in the past until had bought the firm. I hereby declare that both I and my wife are of pure Aryan descent, Lackner assured Berlin on new firm stationery, his name printed at the top in large letters. He signed this warranty under a neatly typed Heil Hitler. Cubed for its part. The Nazi Party certified that Lackner had been a member since 1933 and was in good standing even in the illegal time. Bettelheim's first letters from Dachau showed him frantic about the Aryanization of the business. They urged his mother to work hard with his lawyer cousin, Norbert Bettelheim, to see the transaction through to a quick resolution and to salvage what money they could. In part because she and I-31st and other private affairs in order was far more important than any business payout, which by then he may have concluded was a chimera. And not only because of the Nazis. About the business and Hans write little, it's all his fault, but we need him until I am back, so try to get along with him and I will take revenge. What Schnitzer had done to trigger this vow the letters do not disclose. It is possible that, once Bettelheim entered Dachau, Schnitzer, who never much liked his disdainful younger partner, tried to claim for himself whatever assets the Nazis allowed the former owners to keep.
Schnitzer did sign the Aryanization papers on July 14, 1938, and the following month pleaded with the authorities to leave him enough money to get to the United States. Superscript 36. He and his wife, Alice, who was not Jewish, emigrated to New York City in 1939 and settled in Queens, where he worked in an export-import business until his death in 1971. The couple had no children, so any opportunity to hear their version of these post-Anschluss events ended with Alice Schnitzer's death. Bettelheim did not have many assets to declare beyond his interest in the lumber business. In instructing his mother and sister to settle his personal financial affairs as quickly as possible, he wrote that his life insurance policies were nearly valueless, because he had mostly cashed them out. He speculated that his automobile might be worth something but was not optimistic. Not only had the Nazis appropriated it, but he owed more than $8,000 on the vehicle. He had also accumulated between $12,000 and $15,000 in other debts, and though the 10-room apartment at Gloria Tech 15 was valuable, he and Gina had rented, not owned it. He told his mother to ask Gina what household goods she wanted and, whatever her wishes, to move all the freestanding furniture into storage. If the buffet, cupboards, and other built-ins could not be sold to the next tenant, he wanted them dismantled. From the boards I will then be able to make something for myself, he wrote, as if he somehow might construct a new life from this used lumber. The subsequent letter implies that Paul and Gina possibly Bruno angrily to reiterate his original instructions. Superscript 37. The prisoner also worried about 2 lawsuits against him. One sought to recover what he owed on the automobile, the other claimed unpaid insurance premiums. On October 13th, he told his mother that the suing company should take the car, whose value was more than the debt. His original instructions. Superscript 37. The prisoner also worried about 2 lawsuits against him. One sought to recover what he owed on the automobile, the other claimed unpaid insurance premiums. On October 13th, he told his mother that the suing company should take the car, whose value was more than the debt, if the insurance firm insisted on getting its money. It should come from Bettelheim and Schnitzer, by then an unlikely alternative given that the business had been in the errant hands of Nikolaus Wagner since July. The car, too, was Nazi property by then. The premiums were for fire, accident, and theft insurance on the lumber business. Bettelheim instructed his mother to cancel these policies and reassured her that he had a contractual agreement with the company, Anglo-Danubian Lloyd. That said, he at least did not have to pay back the discount he had been given. In the days immediately before and after Bettelheim's imprisonment, Agnes Crane labored to persuade her government to grant him a visa. Among other things, this required that she signed an affidavit saying that, if necessary, she would support him so he would not become a public charge. On June 9th, a week after Bettelheim entered Dachau, Cordell Hall cabled John Wiley in Vienna. Bettelheim's admissibility does not appear to be dependent on his wife's immigration status, as he apparently will not be supported by her Mrs. Agnes P.O. Crane, whose child is being attended by Mrs. Bettelheim, has promised to support both Drive and Mrs. Bettelheim. There would be no objection to your acceptance of Dr. Bettelheim's visa application if he can be released from incarceration for such purpose. Superscript 3-8. The same day, the American consul cabled back, visa application Bruno. Bettelheim approved today and may be issued immediately on his release. Superscript 3. The State Department say. M. Warren in Washington relayed this toddy good news to Crane in Greenwich, but when she pleaded with him to help gain Bettelheim's release through the U.S. Embassy in Berlin, he told her that the State Department could not make such inquiries because Bettelheim was not an American citizen. Warren suggested that she pursue Bettelheim's release through the American Society of Friends, whose London office had already told her that he was well and might be freed before the summer was out. 4 degrees. Warren also received a plea from Lawrence S. QB, Secretary of the American Psychoanalytic Association, who had been asked to help by Bettelheim's doing her psychoanalytic career in Manhattan, Superintendent Dachau, going through severe mood swings. From fervent hope to deepest despair, with the result that I was emotionally drained before the day even began, a day of 17 long hours that would take all my energy to survive it. For superscript 2. This fluctuation between deep despondency and desperate optimism surfaces again and again in the letters. Now I have been in the camp for 3 months and you can imagine my mood on this day. Bettelheim wrote on August 28th, his 35th birthday. He told his mother and sister to send his condolences to a woman named Erica and her family. Apparently, her husband had recently died, moving the prisoner to write that he envied him. But the birthday letter also reflects Bettelheim's determination to survive. He asked his mother to get him instead of or as well as Vienna's press a subscription to the Frankfurter Zeitung, saying that though he only read newspapers on Sundays, they chased away a little of my dark thoughts. He assured Paula that she should not worry about his ingrown hair because it caused him little calm, claimed, reminded her to send him $95 every week, asked once again whether the furniture had been put in storage, and urged her to keep trying to retrieve at least some portion of her assets as well as an advance on his own. On September 1st, he told her that before his arrest he had ordered 6 sets of shirts and pants of the same material from a tailor named Koenig. He asked his mother to pay for the clothes with funds from the business or, failing that, to loan him the cash. From another tailor, whose name he had forgotten but whose address he recalled as Postgas 13, he had ordered a suit, on which he had already paid more than $500, as well as a lightweight suit and a winter ulster, a short overcoat. He asked his mother to pick up these garments as well, then wondered if he would ever have a chance to wear them. By now, Margaret was investigating an opportunity to emigrate to Cologne, BI8, and her brother urged her to take it, stressing that she must not stay in Vienna because of him. He added that Trude should also make sure that she got away, and sent her warm greetings. But it was Gina who preoccupied his thoughts. his mother had written that his wife was hoping to travel from New York to Cuba in an attempt to re-enter the United States on a permanent visa rather than the temporary one she had been granted. Bruno urged that Gina get to Cuba as soon as possible. "Is she well?" he asked. "Edith Buxbaum has to take care of her. Tell her that the only thing that keeps me going is the hope for a better future on which she is working, and she should keep at it." For superscript 3, such passages throughout the letters leave that Wyman and Bruno's with Trude Weinfeld yearned to resume their marriage in the United States. "Please tell Gina how endlessly I long to see her again," he wrote in one letter 44. In an other he declared that it was his only and most longing wish to be with her as soon as possible and forever, but she must be prepared that this is still very uncertain. Tell her that so she doesn't have any false hopes. 45. In Vienna, Paula and Margaret Bettelheim had implored various Nazi officials for weeks to release Bruno, and feared for his life constantly. So did Trude, but though she loved him, she was neither his wife nor a blood relative and could only stand on the sidelines and hope. Moreover, like all other Jews in the city, she and her parents faced their own peril. Her father, a successful accountant, was in Switzerland on business at the Anschluss, stranded with no money. He wanted to return, but Trude discouraged him and instead urged her mother to join him. Friederike Weinfeld was at first reluctant, but when forced to scrub the street on her knees, she took her 26-year-old daughter's baby, Weiss. Soon the Nazis closed in on a Montessori school where Weinfeld taught, scorning its progressive principles, and the Jews who worked there demanding that it vacate the public building it occupied on the Schubertstrasse. Emma Plank, the director of the school and a Jew, managed to find a sympathetic Gentile substitute, and under his protection classes continued in new quarters until the school year ended. This was little comfort for Weinfeld, especially after the suicide of her aunt, who felt abandoned by her brother and his wife. 46. Each morning, all Vienna's Jews awoke to the possibility that they would be summoned to Gestapo headquarters at the Hotel Metropole. And in late spring, Weinfeld received a command. "They didn't tell me what they wanted, but like a good little girl I went. They took away her passport and locked her in the bathroom, interrogating her on and off all day, subjecting her to an absolutely gruesome experience. They released her by the evening and, after a few days, returned the passport. Determined now to leave the country, she found a young man who said he would take her over the mountains into Switzerland. Some Montessori parents, grateful for the dedication she had shown their children, gave her money to pay him and to buy provisions for the trip. She also received a few gold coins from the new head of the school, to whom she entrusted a letter to Bruno. She packed what possessions she could in trunks and sent them ahead to Edward Fischer, her friend Emma Rena's brother, a teacher in the Swiss canton of Glarus, just across the border. 47. In mid-September, Clymer. She and the guide left the guide that 6 months before had been the western part of an independent Austria. From there they walked for several days, staying in hostels at night, until they reached the edge of freedom. The Swiss guards proved friendly and gave them the room until the next morning. "It was a terrible night for me," Trude recalled, "because the young man wanted to take advantage of the situation. It took all my crying and pleading to keep him from molesting me." The next day, she took a train to Edward Fischer's home, paying for the ticket with the gold coins, which she had hidden in her stockings. 48. Bettelheim remained at Dachau, but on the morning of September 23rd, as the prisoners marched out of the Appelplatz to their details, the commandant suddenly called them back over the loudspeaker. All labor detachments to be dismissed. Came the next order, followed by all Jews to form up in blocks. For several weeks, a trickle of prisoners, including Jews, had been freed once they had demonstrated to their captors that they had the visas and the wherewithal to leave the Third Reich immediately. Now Bettelheim and the other Austrian Jews gathered in the mustering area, hoping that the mass release so long rumored was about to take place. They stood there for almost 6 hours, until 7 in the evening, when the SS guards marched them out the main gate. "We were driven into cattle trucks, which were standing in readiness on a railway line," Bruno Heilig wrote. "There were more than 1,200 of us, and we were packed into 4 trucks. We stood tight against each other, and by the time we reached the station at Munich we were half stifled. 5 degrees once again. The SS prodded the inmates onto a train, this time headed north through Nuremberg into the heart of Germany. As on the transport from Vienna to Dachau in June, the guards carried rifles with fixed bayonets. But they employed less brutality this time, since the weeks in Dachau had left their passengers properly cowed. After a night of fearful speculation, the prisoners arrived in Weimar, once the intellectual and cultural cradle of Germany, the home of Goethe and Schiller. 5 miles to the north, beech trees covered the slopes of Yttersberg, when Heinrich Himmler, the SS overlord, had established a concentration camp on the site the previous summer. He called it Buchenwald. Bettelheim was now prisoner number 9036. Almost everything about this new camp was worse than Dachau. The food rations were smaller, the work was harder, mail and money from home were more restricted, the guards more imaginative and quicker in their punishments, and killing was more common. In Weimar, the Yttersberg was called Totenberg, the Mount of Death, a wooden box so small that the nails driven through it hissed. For 2 days and 3 nights, the box sat on the parade ground for all to see, as the caged victim screamed in pain. On the 3rd morning, he was put out of his misery with a lethal injection. The man who ordered this cautionary exhibit was Karl Otto Koch, commandant of the camp and husband of Ilse Karl, the notorious bitch of Buchenwald, who beat prisoners with her riding crop, staged sexual orgies for her own amusement, and had lampshades made from the tattooed skin of dead inmates. Buchenwald was also far less hygienic than Dachau. The huts were dirty, the prisoners were dirty, and all the tools were sticky with the filth that had dried on them. 5 Superscript 1 strictly enforced rules prohibited defecating or urinating during the 12-hour workday, and even during the periods when prisoners were allowed to relieve themselves. Indoor toilets were useless because there was no fresh water. Latrines, Bettelheim wrote, were usually nothing but a trench with logs on either side on which prisoners had to balance. 5 Superscript 2 The stench of these pits filled the air, mingling with the thick mist that often shrouded the Yttersberg, enveloping the camp in a fetid soup that soaked through clothes and boots. It was in this dank, murderous climate that Bettelheim met Ernst Fettern, as they passed bricks along the human chain. Because of his poor eyesight, Bettelheim dropped many of the bricks Fettern threw to him, fumbles that could on one's foot or, worse, move the guard to thrash them both. Fettern recalled making a snide remark about this ineptitude. "Is that your brick?" The ETTLHEIM said. In the ensuing exchange of words I called to my opposite, "You nobody." "Who is a nobody for you? Are you an anybody?" "I am Bettelheim." "And I am Fettern." "Are you a relative of Paul Fettern?" "I am his son." The 2 prisoners then shook hands and remained friends from that hour. I think even friends of a very special kind, said Fettern. 5 Superscript 3 Bettelheim, in recalling the meeting, also remarked on the long-standing friendship that developed, adding that he had been inwardly amused by Fettern's initial irritation and had told him that he never had the slightest intention, nor any desire, to be a competent brick catcher or brick thrower. It was my very particular, and highly narcissistically invested self-image, that permitted me to consider funny a situation in which I was cursed out and depreciated, not only by the guards but even by Ernst Fettern. They viewed as degrading my lack